The morning I died the first time, it was raining so hard that the construction cranes above the skyline looked like skeletons dissolving into mist, their long arms swallowed by low clouds as if the city itself were trying to erase what had happened beneath them. And I remember thinking absurdly bitterly that at least the weather understood drama even if the man I loved did not. In that life, I had been engaged to Victor Halle, a rising star in a rapidly expanding real estate firm. The kind of man who wore tailored suits even on weekends and spoke about legacy as though he had already built one. And I had believed with unwavering certainty that I was part of that future, that the luxury apartments he marketed with polished confidence would one day be mirrored in our own lives. I handled the compliance paperwork for his projects, ensuring zoning approvals aligned, safety reports were filed, signatures obtained, because he said he trusted my meticulousness more than anyone else's, and I mistook that reliance for intimacy. When the scandal broke faulty materials used in a high-rise development, cost-cutting measures that compromised structural integrity, inspectors bribed to look the other way, my name surfaced on the approval forms as the final administrative sign-off. Victor stood before the press with carefully measured remorse, explaining that he had delegated certain responsibilities to trusted staff, and had been deeply shocked to learn of oversights. Oversights. As if the hairline cracks running through concrete beams were clerical typos. As if the residents evacuated in panic were inconvenienced rather than endangered. As if I were not standing 3 steps behind him, watching my career collapse in real time. I confronted him that night in the parking garage beneath his office tower, the fluorescent lights flickering overhead, rainwater dripping from the undercarriage of expensive cars, while he adjusted his cufflinks and avoided my eyes. He told me almost gently that someone had to absorb the impact, that the board would never allow their most promising executive to fall when a compliance officer's negligence provided a cleaner narrative. He spoke about sacrifice as though it were a romantic gesture, rather than a calculated exchange. "It will pass," he said. "You'll find another position. I'll make it up to you." But even then, beneath the shock and hurt, I recognized something chilling. He was not asking for forgiveness. He was informing me of a decision already made. When investigators pressed, he produced internal emails selectively edited to imply that I had independently approved substitutions in building materials to expedite timelines. The public needed a culprit, and I was administratively convenient. My license was revoked pending inquiry. My reputation, once a quiet asset, became a cautionary tale whispered across industry corridors. I left the firm carrying a cardboard box of personal belongings while news vans idled outside, cameras hungry for a face to attach to outrage. My death did not occur in a dramatic collapse of concrete, though sometimes I wished it had for the poetic symmetry. It happened months later, in a smaller firm that hired me reluctantly and paid me less, after weeks of insomnia fueled by relentless headlines and anonymous online comments dissecting my character. I had begun to doubt my own memory, replaying every signature, every approval, wondering whether exhaustion had clouded judgment. The night the new building site inspection went wrong, when a scaffolding section gave way during a storm, and I rushed forward to ensure workers were clear, I slipped on wet plywood and fell 2 stories. The impact was swift. The darkness that followed was almost merciful. My final thought was not of Victor but of how desperately I tried to be indispensable to a man who viewed people as replaceable line items. So when I opened my eyes to sunlight filtering through the curtains of my old apartment, the air filled with the faint hum of traffic and the smell of coffee brewing in the kitchen, I knew instantly that something impossible had occurred. The calendar on the wall displayed a date 18 months before the scandal. My phone resting on the nightstand buzzed with a message from Victor, "dinner tonight?" Big news. In my previous life, that message had preceded his proposal, a public display of devotion that secured both my heart and my professional entanglement with his firm. I stared at the screen now with a steadiness I had not possessed before. Rebirth did not feel like a gift wrapped in sentiment. It felt like a second audit of him, of myself. This time, I did not accept the proposal during that glittering dinner overlooking the city skyline. I listened to his speech about partnership, about building an empire together, about trust, and I asked questions instead of blushing. I asked about supply chains, about contractor vetting processes, about oversight protocols. He laughed at first, charmed by what he interpreted as diligence. But when I pressed further, when I inquired whether cost projections had been adjusted to account for rising material prices, and whether alternative suppliers had been fully screened, his smile thinned. He assured me everything was under control, that I worried too much, that vision required boldness. In my previous life, I had been flattered to be included in strategic conversations. Now I recognized deflection disguised as charisma. I did not refuse him outright that evening, but I told him I needed time. The flicker of irritation he masked so quickly might have escaped my notice once. Now it glowed like a warning signal. Over the following months, I remained at the firm but shifted my approach. Instead of relying solely on internal documentation, I cultivated discreet relationships with external inspectors and suppliers, verifying claims independently. I saved copies of procurement contracts, photographed delivery receipts, archived email threads in a secure personal drive inaccessible through company servers. I began mapping discrepancies in projected versus actual material costs, noticing subtle patterns of substitution justified by temporary shortages. When I raised concerns in meetings, Victor framed them as overcautious pessimism, subtly positioning himself as the visionary constrained by bureaucratic anxiety. But I no longer sought his approval. I sought clarity. I attended industry seminars alone, expanding my network beyond his influence, and quietly consulted a legal advisor about whistleblower protections, purely hypothetical, of course. The pivotal moment arrived earlier than before, during a site visit to the very high-rise that would, in my previous life, become the epicenter of scandal. Standing on the unfinished 12th floor, wind whipping dust into the air, I examined support beams stamped with a manufacturer code I did not recognize from approved vendor lists. The project manager assured me they met equivalent standards, produced documentation that appeared legitimate at a glance. But I requested original certification numbers and later cross-checked them against regulatory databases. The certifications corresponded to a different grade of material altogether. In my first life, I had trusted internal assurances. In this one, I compiled a dossier. Rather than confronting Victor privately, I submitted a formal compliance report directly to the regulatory board, attaching evidence and requesting an independent audit. I understood the risk. Exposure could still implicate my oversight role. But this time, my documentation trail was meticulous, demonstrating consistent objections and requests for verification. When the board initiated an inquiry, Victor was blindsided. He summoned me to his office, the glass walls offering a panoramic view of the city he imagined ruling, and demanded to know why I had escalated the matter externally. I told him calmly that structural integrity is not negotiable, that compliance is not a courtesy but a mandate, and that transparency protects everyone involved, especially those with the most to lose. For the first time, he dropped the veneer of composed charm and revealed irritation edged with something darker: entitlement. He accused me of undermining him, of jeopardizing investor confidence. I replied that if confidence depended on concealment, it was already compromised. The audit uncovered widespread cost-cutting measures authorized at the executive level, including falsified inspection reports and supplier kickbacks. Unlike my previous life, the paper trail did not lead to me. It circled unmistakably around Victor and two senior managers. The media storm that followed mirrored the one I remembered, but this time I stood apart from it, my name mentioned only as the compliance officer who initiated the review. Victor attempted damage control, claiming ignorance of lower-level decisions, but emails surfaced contradicting his statements. Investors withdrew. The board convened emergency meetings. His proposal ring remained unworn in its velvet box on my dresser, a relic of a path not taken. When charges were filed, Victor sought me out not in a parking garage, but in a quiet cafe away from cameras. He looked older already, the confidence that once radiated from him dulled by scrutiny. He spoke of pressure from stakeholders, of market competition, of the fine line between efficiency and compromise. He insisted he never intended harm, that he had believed the substitutions safe. I listened, noting how his language centered always on intention rather than consequence. When he asked whether I could speak on his behalf, testify to his character, I felt a strange detachment. In another life, I would have sacrificed myself to preserve his image. In this one, I declined gently. explaining that character is demonstrated through action, not endorsement. There was no fury in me, only recognition. I resigned from the firm shortly after, not out of scandal, but because I no longer wished to tether my professional identity to volatile ambition. With savings accumulated and a clearer sense of purpose, I founded an independent consulting agency focused on ethical compliance in construction and development. At first, clients were sparse. Few companies eagerly invite scrutiny. But as regulatory frameworks tightened and public trust became a competitive asset, demand grew. I built a team of engineers, auditors, and legal experts committed to transparency not as branding but as principle. We conducted thorough site evaluations, offered training workshops, and refused contracts that required silence in exchange for profit. The work was demanding, often contentious, but profoundly stabilizing. My value no longer derived from proximity to a powerful man. It emerged from expertise and integrity aligned. Years later, standing on the completed rooftop of a residential building my firm had certified from foundation to finish, I watched families move into apartments built with materials tested and verified, beams bearing weight without hidden fractures. Children leaned over balconies waving to friends below, unaware of the invisible battles waged to ensure their safety. The skyline shimmered in the late afternoon light, cranes still present but less ominous in my perception. I thought of the woman who had died believing her worth was tied to being chosen, to being indispensable to someone else's ascent. I wish she could see this version of us steady, self-directed, unafraid to stand alone in a boardroom and insist on standards that inconvenience profit. Rebirth, I realized, is not about rewriting the villain into virtue. Victor reacted differently in this timeline, more defensive than cold, more cornered than calculating. But his core remained anchored in ambition untempered by accountability. The true transformation lay in my refusal to anchor myself to him. I had learned that love without shared ethics is a liability, that success achieved through silence corrodes from within, and that the courage to escalate concerns before disaster strikes is worth more than any proposal framed against a glittering skyline. As evening settled and lights flickered on across the city, illuminating windows like constellations grounded in steel and glass, I felt neither bitterness nor triumph. I felt solidity. The kind that does not crack under pressure because it was built, this time, on uncompromised ground.